welcome to TENGRIDOME. I caught the tail end of last night's fight night event, and I only watched 3 fights on the main card, but the ones that I watched I would say they were pretty entertaining, and so there's a decent amount of things that are worth discussing in those fights, I believe. So here it is. Here's me with another one of those really quick TENGRIDOMEs that I pump out immediately after the fight. I have not revisited the fights, but I hope that while the fights are still fresh in my memory, I would not make any egregious mistakes in evaluating what was happening in there. But without faffing about too much, let's just get into it. So Dominick, Cruz and Chito Vera threw down last night, and it was a pretty good fight. And Dominick Cruz, despite being 37 years old, with a well-documented and well-publicized history of horrendous injuries, has put on a decent showing, even though he got finished in the end. But what both fighters did in that fight was there was some pretty interesting and impressive stuff in there. So I guess we should start by zooming out a little bit first and explaining what Chito's and Cruz's game plans and games usually look like. So with Chito Vera for the longest time has suffered from this issue where he would not only just give up the first round or the first couple rounds, but he would also be extremely passive during those. Like, for example, he gets taken down, instead of actively creating space to strike or to scramble up to his feet like he does now, he would just hold on for dear life and hang out in guard and maybe through a half-assed submission attempt or tap the sides of the other guy's head, that kind of stuff. Right now, though, even though he still gives up the first round, or even maybe the first half of the fight, he uses it to build. It's kind of similar to what Petr Yan does, although I would say it's slightly less nuanced in the sense that Petr Yan, for example, would give up the round but would rarely take all that much damage doing so, or give up the round in a fashion that is extremely convincing. If with Chito Vera, whenever he loses the first round, you go, oh, okay, it's Chito Vera. It's Chito Vera in the first round. He lost the round. Okay, that's it. With Petr Yan, it's more obvious that he's building towards something, that he's making reads. And with Chito Vera, it's more similar to something like, for example, Tony Ferguson does. And I've said this before on the preview for this card, which was I appeared on the Forbidden Technique podcast. I'm not sure if those who are listening to this on YouTube are familiar with it, but the Forbidden Technique is our new weekly show and has been coming out for a long while. And honestly, during my absence, they basically saved our asses. They saved the website's asses because everyone was extremely busy. But these guys, they kept up the pace, they kept up the release schedule, and it's a good show, yeah. So definitely go to the Fight Side Podcast Network and please check it out. So I've said this on their show, and I said that in Tony Ferguson's case, he would take a decent amount of damage in the beginning of the fight, but then use that. It's almost like he's this will sound pretty weird, but it's almost like he's using his face as a tactile interface. Okay, this guy throws this guy throws that, and now I know what he's gonna throw, and so he uses that to navigate the pocket and pour on volume and avoids the other person's strike seamlessly in the pocket while throwing his own volume. With Chito Vera, it's more like, okay, he throws this and that. He connected with this and that, and now I'm going to land the perfect counter to nearly kill the guy dead. And we saw that against Rob Font in his most recent outing. Basically, Rob Font almost ripped his own ass in half, throwing hundreds of punches per round and despite this, Chito Vera would go on to just drop him or hurt him extremely badly almost every single round, or even like multiple times per round, with really precise, really spot-on counters that he picked specifically for up front, and like got the timing specifically, like by basically deciding to stay on the other end and weather the storm, stay on the other end of all those punches and kicks and weather the storm, and then, okay, now I know what you're gonna do. And it's also conceptually somewhat similar to what Petr Yan does as well, in that Petr Yan, it's not really precise counters in the sense that you already get into the fight expecting these things, and so you have these pre-prepared looks that you're going to throw right away. It's more like, I'm going to punish you for attempting to do these things to me, and I'm going to punish you for that first round. I hope I'm making sense. Like, okay, you threw hundreds of jabs, you threw all these 1-2s, you threw to my body, and and they both use the double forearms guard pretty decently to roll with shots and avoid shots and just block them all together. So if you go back and watch some of the Chito Vera fights where the other guy outlanded him by a lot, as is the case with this fight, a lot of those connections are mostly like on the arms and on the elbows, or like the bounce off the top of his head. So he's reasonably defensively responsible. It's not like he sticks out his face and like takes every shot and then he goes, okay, now I'm going to get you for it. No. But the concept is there. The concept in that I'm going to make you like regret ever trying to do that to me again. And it limits the other guy's volume. It discourages the volume. It makes the other guy anxious about throwing again. And with Dominick Cruz, on the other hand, Dominick Cruz's style has undergone some changes. Primarily because, I mean, obviously with Dominick Cruz's history of injury and at Dominick Cruz's age, you cannot quite maintain the same style anyway. It's like, it's just a universal truth of fighting. But it's especially evident in Dominick Cruz's case because his style was always so unorthodox. And I will say right away that I would not recommend anyone ever try to recreate Dominick Cruz's style or emulate it in the same way that Dominick Cruz performs it, because while it's conceptually sound, and for that we'll need to explain what Dominick Cruz's style is conceptually, it's been born out of a need to tie his striking with his wrestling together in a reasonably seamless way to land really sharp, really quick reactive takedowns, draw people into those takedowns, and avoid getting blasted, because he started at featherweight, I believe, and some of those guys were had a decent size advantage over him. And according to himself, he wanted to avoid getting blasted off his feet by big guys. But the reason why he managed, and the popular perception of Dominick Cruz is that he's this defensive wizard whose head movement is impossible to track, and he will, like in his best days, guys scarcely landed a glove on him, scarcely landed a single solid blow on him back in his prime. And it's not really the case. It's more that his wrestling tied with his stand-up game so well together that he was able to avoid most of those shots by just ducking into those level changes, or making other guys hesitant about throwing down with him. And it's a sound strategy. It's a sound concept. Except the way he did it comes with multiple flaws that are tactical flaws and mechanical flaws. It's flaws that were born out of his technique, the unorthodox technique that he used in order to perform all these actions. And it's honestly my belief that the reason why he acquired so many injuries is just because of his style. Because if you go back, like even in this fight, he pranced around so much, But if you go back and you look at the way he moved, it was all these very explosive lateral motions. He would do this hop step, it's like a triangle step. It's a triangle step without the base. Imagine like two lines going in opposite directions at 45-degree angles forward. And so he would hop step forward, land in a stance, then hop step backwards, and then land into opposite stance. And he would simultaneously bend over at the waist and at the knees, and use that to either throw it like a body jab, and it's not a very effective body jab. He just touches the guy, and then he uses that to plant and launch himself forward into this really explosive double leg takedown. Really like pretty much the definition of a blast double. And obviously that puts a lot of lateral stress on your knees. Like, even if you try it right now, and I would only recommend you do this if you have a solid base of physical, conditioning, so you don't accidentally injure yourself. If you do this hop step, you will feel just how much forward momentum the motion carries, and how much forward momentum has to be stopped by the knee, put at an angle, and so it just by design puts a lot of lateral pressure on the ligaments of the knee. And the way he punches as well, he always throws all his punches straight, even if he throws hooks. And it's like he launches his entire body forward into the punch, and despite this, the punch doesn't carry a lot of power, because a lot of that power is dissipated by all that extraneous movement. And this is like, we all know that Dominick Cruz had to undergo surgery for a torn shoulder, and I would say, yeah, I can see why. I can see why that happened, and I can see why that he had to undergo that surgery. But besides that, Dominick Cruz, there's also this common perception of Dominick Cruz as having zero power in his shots. And I think we need to be more clear in what do we mean by that. So I think there needs to be more clarity brought to this perception, in that I would say that Dominick Cruz has the capacity to land with impact. He can get your attention with his shots. And whenever he tries to throw punches straight, they clearly bother his opponents. It's just that his style of movement doesn't facilitate proper fundamental boxing technique when you throw punches. And it's like Danny Martin described Dominick Cruz as a technician, clearly a very smart technician, with just a very bad toolbox. It's just something that he put together. It's something he put together out of scraps and stuff that he's found laying around his garage, and that's how he goes about doing his job. He gets the job done, but he encounters a lot of trouble doing it in the process, because all his tools are just so weird. Like, instead of a wrench, it's like some kind of like fucking rebar with like a dinosaur's head stapled on top of it. I don't know. It's just, you get the idea, right? And so, if you look back at the notorious defeat of Dominick Cruz by Cody Garbrandt didn't necessarily like come up with this really like strategic game plan of like approaching it conceptually, from the sense of he uses this and that positioning, he circles around the cage in that direction, he sets up things of that movement in this particular way. It was more like, I have faster hands, and Dominick Cruz has really bad technique whenever he throws his punches, and I have the much faster hands and the much cleaner technique in boxing, so I'm gonna throw lots of 2-3s. And that's essentially that's essentially it. I'm going to use my athleticism and my superior boxing defense and all that stuff, and the weirdness that Dominick Cruz has on entry to counter him. And with Henry Cejudo, it was like the opposite approach. Like, he moves a lot, so I'm gonna punt the legs. And he also does this really weird, like, lean away, ducking, like, exit. leans to the side, he kind of bends over, he rotates his shoulders, and kind of leans forward, like with his back straight, and just runs out the side. And so I believe that's Henry Cejudo. If I'm not mistaken, Henry Cejudo got Dominick Cruz with the same shot that Chito got Dominick Cruz, except it wasn't a knee, it was just the same concept. And they utilized the same opening. But so, the actual fight itself. And so, the one thing that you notice right away is that Dominick Cruz comes out guns blazing, throwing marching combinations, blitzing forward, throwing an enormous amount of volume, and moving around way more in the vein of his earlier performances back when he was younger, because he clearly felt that the only way for him to beat Chito Vera in this fight is to pour on so much volume and drown Chito in all this volume, because otherwise Chito will find the connections and knock him out. And unfortunately for Cruz, that's exactly what happened, despite all his efforts. So, for example, if you go back a little bit and watch the Casey Kenny fight, the Dominick Cruz versus Casey Kenny, the somewhat controversial decision, I don't really care either way. I think Cruz had done enough, and Casey Kenny also landed a lot of good shots, so whatever. Dominick Cruz made a concerted effort to kind of stay a little bit calmer than usual and not move around as much, and mostly use more traditional boxing footwork. Like he would step forward with the jab, he would make the follow-up step on the right hand, and he would throw the punches straight. And he had a lot of success, like throwing the lead uppercut, the ab jab, and he threw it normally and not with a straight hand. And he's had a decent amount of success doing that. In this fight, he sort of went back to the usual mold, even though he was clearly not as fast or explosive, or he looked like he couldn't really keep this up quite at the same pace that he used to. So immediately in the first round, he comes out with lots of these marching combinations and blitzes, and Chito Vera conceded the back foot immediately, and he covered up, and a lot of those shots connected on on the arms, bounced off the top of Chito's head, but some of them found their mark, and Chito looked like he didn't quite enjoy them. It wasn't like, oh fuck, I'm hurt, this hurts, I hate this. It was more like, oh okay, he's connecting. This is pretty unpleasant. It's like a gradation of Chito Vera's responses to strikes. Like for example, against Jose Aldo, when Jose Aldo connected with like a straight right hand to the body, and or with a jab to Chito's face, Chito Vera obviously looked very uncomfortable. He was like, oh fuck, I did not expect this. Anyway. The way that Cruz performs these blitzes and marching combinations, it's like, if only he maintained his stance doing that, it's like he flings himself forward and the arms sort of follow him. And if he maintained his stance, if he maintained better posture during those, I think he could have actually, not a wobble Chito, but caused him a reasonable amount of discomfort. Because, and again, I'm going to launch into my Soviet boxing spiel. If you look up the YouTube channel called, in Russian it's called Школа бокса Алексея Фролова, and in English I would translate it as, Alexei Frolov's School of Boxing. That's ALEXEYFROLOV. I'm sorry, not used to spelling stuff out like English speakers usually do. Yeah, look that channel up, and you will find, and look for the video entitled, in Russian it's called "Как правильно психануть," and in English it's more like how to go berserk correctly, or something like how to go nuts correctly. But the idea behind the video is how to throw blitzing combinations and get guys off you if you're like in this desperate situation where the guy just presses forward and he would just not leave you alone. He'd throw this really like explosive 1-2-3 combination that goes like, it's basically a blitz, it's a marching combination, but you maintain proper posture throughout the whole combination, and you use the momentum to change stances and plant yourself and like sit down on those shots. So they're clearly thrown with power, even though it's a very explosive and like wild combination. But despite this, you throw with proper technique, with proper form. Your chin is covered by your shoulders rising, because in Soviet boxing you turn your shoulders over whenever you punch. And this way you should be able to get guys off you. And the idea is not to land with every single shot. The idea is to land with the single final shot that is like this jolt. It's like a left straight almost, even though you're throwing a jab. It's a very long strike and it hurts quite a bit. And so, excuse me, and this way, if only Dominick Cruz trained under a Soviet boxer, is basically what I'm saying, then he would have probably had a much easier career. But alas, Dominick Cruz is Dominick Cruz, and he's neat. He's neat because of that. I think Dominick Cruz is important for the history of MMA. He's going to come down in history of MMA as one of those weird pioneers that didn't quite do things correctly, but the idea was still there, and he was one of the first guys that clearly like really cared about positioning and out-positioning your opponent and setting traps and luring your opponent into those traps with the positioning that you utilize and using footwork to move from position to position. Because most guys back then, they mostly cared about the actual hurting portion, like me throwing strikes. Me throw lots of strikes, me throw big punches, and me win. With Dominick Cruz, it was more nuanced than that, even though the way that he went about performing the actions isn't quite ideal. But in the actual fight, so Dominick Cruz wins the first round handily, okay. And the second round, he still... they both look pretty, like, visibly worse for wear after that first round. Like, Dominick Cruz is all sweaty and kind of, like, looks tired. And Chito Vera looks pretty uncomfortable with the pace. So props to Dominick Cruz to, like, at his age, with his history of injuries, once again, coming out, like blasting on all cylinders. It's pretty crazy. It was pretty crazy to watch, actually. And I guess with Dominick Cruz, he's always looked like he's uncomfortable with the pace he's setting, but he was always fine. It's kind of like a Dustin Poirier thing. So anyway, the second round comes, and Dominick Cruz still attempts the same things that he does, and then Chito Vera just connects with this. I think it was a left straight counter. I'm starting to regret not catching up on the fight. Hang on, I'm gonna look up the clip. I'm gonna look up the actual clip. I think it should be on Fight Pass by now. Okay, so I'm sort of skimming through the fight, and I forgot to point out that Dominick Cruz had initially had lots of success landing some really pretty takedowns. Really, really nice. Really great timing on them. Great entries. Like, got Chito Vera to the ground like nobody's business. It's just that Chito Vera's defensive grappling and wrestling has improved quite a bit. And from then on, Chito Vera would start to sprawl right on top of Cruz, like on a dime, and limp leg out of single leg attempts with not much issue. And I guess on one hand, Cruz could be like not selling out on those takedown attempts, but on the other hand, it's still pretty impressive that... Still pretty impressive to see how much Vera's game has grown over the years and how much his wrestling improved over the years. The other thing that stands out to me upon revisiting the fight is that Dominick Cruz has been doing a great job of putting his kicks and punches together during that fight. Like, even though the kicks were still pretty ugly, the combinations were pretty cohesive, and he would feint, and he would use kick feints, and he would use like punching feints to set up his strikes, and he would find a certain amount of success throwing calf kicks, But then again, with Chito Vera, you have to really like commit to some sort of to the damaging strike of your choosing, and from the second round onwards, Chito Vera would start checking those kicks hard. Pretty much every single kick from that point onwards was checked, and so this obviously affected Dominick Cruz's movement as well. And Chito Vera has been also like started like after the first round he got a bead on Cruz's timing, as he tends to do. And so sometimes he'd also throw this low-line sidekick to Cruz's knee. He would stand southpaw. And he would stand southpaw for large portions of that fight. Vera usually switches stances more readily and more often. In this fight, he picked a side. He picked a side and he decided I'm going to fight open stance and I'm going to punish Cruz for throwing always all that stuff that he does. And like after the fight, I believe that Chito Vera... in the post-fight interview, he said that Dominick Cruz does everything technically wrong. So basically, you could see that Chito Vera essentially treated Dominick Cruz like as throwing he's just throwing stupid shit. I'm gonna go ahead and gonna get in there and knock him out. To quote Tiger Showman. And I mean, that's essentially how you beat Cruz in this day and age, and it's the correct approach, I would say. And yeah, and so I'm watching the clips now, and Dominick Cruz looks pretty haggard, yeah. And Chito Vera is doing markedly well than I seem to think watching live, because I was growing kind of frustrated with Chito Vera because. I did not like his inactivity for large stretches of that fight because with Rob Font, the knockdowns were much more frequent and much more obvious. He obviously hurt Rob Font much more badly than he did Cruz. And then again, Cruz is also like one of the most durable fighters in the history of MMA. Funnily enough, it's also part of what has enabled his success in the cage, even though everyone perceived him as this elusive, really like weird guy that is extremely hard to pin down. But here, Chito Vera is tracking Cruz's movement, head movement, and connecting with lots of straight punches, outlanding him in the pocket. In terms of significant, painful connections, I would say. And there are sequences in which you can see Chito Vera putting together combinations that are clearly meant to hurt Dominick Cruz into head kicks. And so it wasn't like if you're watching this fight live, you might have thought that Chito Vera just threw a head kick and knocked Dominick Cruz out. No, Chito Vera, he knew what he was doing. He came into the fight with a clear game plan, and it's just that in the post-fight interview. You may wonder, watching this fight, why Chito Vera is not throwing like a lot of leg kicks. And Chito Vera has confessed to having trouble tracking Dominick Cruz down at first and landing and finding the leg kicks. And he's found the body kick on occasion, and I was kind of growing frustrated with him watching the fight. I was like, throw the body kick, come on. But it ended up not mattering. And from the second round onwards, as I was saying before, Dominick Cruz's connection started finding their mark. Dominick Cruz's punches started finding their mark less and less frequently, to the point where pretty much most of his volume has become empty at this point. At the mid-fight, it was basically clear that Chito Vera has now figured out Dominick Cruz's timing and the way that he kind of figured out how to deal with the weirdness of Dominick Cruz, and so he started punishing it from the get-go. Lots of solid left straights, lots of right hooks, lots of left hooks. I wanted Chito Vera to kind of punish the extreme ducks that Dominick Cruz performs with maybe knee attempts and uppercuts, but in retrospect, I kind of think that maybe he passed up on that opportunity to not scare Dominick Cruz away from that leaning motion that led to the finish. On the other hand, it would have also opened Dominick Cruz up to straight punches, but sometimes in fighting, not every opening is worth exploiting, if that makes sense. What do I mean by that? Like, personally, whenever I spar and whenever I train and because of my experiences growing up in Russia and getting into like altercations that I sadly cannot confirm, but on the other hand, I also can't go around yelling like, "Oh, I have a 400-0 record in street fights." But yeah, I've had to get into it on a couple of occasions. I'm sure that's not beyond the pale for a person from Siberia. Forgive me for going to this argument, but it is what it is. But I am kind of like a very impulse-driven, finish-oriented individual. And sometimes I personally just lose sight of which openings I can afford to pass up on to set up something better down the line. Or like hit them in passing to go sort of like, I see ya, there's an opening there, and sort of plant this idea into my opponent's head to make him worry about it, and then do something else instead. So to preoccupy their minds with that opening, and instead just when in fact I am actually using it as a diversion tactic. Like, for example, I don't know, what would be a good example? Let's imagine your opponent is. Let's imagine your opponent is very concerned about your overhand. And for the sake of the argument, let's picture your opponent is very fond of the shoulder roll. He's fond of shoulder rolling your right hand. And so, so you time the overhand with the dipping jab. You throw the jab to the body, and then you immediately throw and then instead of throwing the overhand, because the opponent expects the overhand, you throw to the body. You throw a right straight to the body, and the opponent goes, "Okay, you got me," but you're still threatening with the overhand, and you creep forward, you pressure. Again, you throw the dipping jab, and then you do another dipping motion as if you're going to throw the right straight to the body, but instead you use the dipping motion to kind of like launch yourself into an overhand and connect with the overhand. And provided your opponent is still pretty durable, the opponent survives that attempt. And so he's even more conscious about the overhand coming in and the need to shoulder roll it right now. And so you're pressing, and the opponent starts like circling to the side. You threaten with the overhand, kind of put your weight on your front foot, and the opponent goes, "Oh fuck, here comes the overhand." And instead you use that momentum to do a switch kick, and you kick the other guy in the head. Does that make sense? And it's kind of what Chito Vera has done in this fight at the very finish. So Chito Vera in the final round has started working from southpaw. He started much more often, even more often than he did before. And so he started throwing lots of really committed left straights, really committed 1-2s from the southpaw position, and I think he threw a bunch of right hooks to make Dominick Cruz circle in the direction he wanted him to. I'm not sure. I have the clip, I have the footage right here. I should just look at it. Give me a sec. Okay, I see it now. So, remember what I said about Chito being committed to the open stance? It's a bit more nuanced than that. Chito Vera used the orthodox stance to make Dominick Cruz circle to his power side, because Dominick Cruz wants to circle to his power side to land the jab. And then when Dominick Cruz got set on moving to that side, he would switch stances and then do the opposite and make him circle to the other side. I'm generally not a fan of lots of stance switching, but the way that Chito Vera does it and the way that Piotr Jan did it against Sandhagen, I think that's really clever, and I like that. I like seeing that. And there's the finish. So 246 of the fourth round. Before that, Chito Vera was throwing lots of committed 1-2s from both stances, making Dominick Cruz circle to the side, because Dominick Cruz doesn't necessarily like avoid straight punches in the most economical fashion. He doesn't just dip his head down from side to side to slip the punches, or like put his arms up and take them on the gloves, on the arms. He just does these I would say dramatic exits to one side or the other. He uses lateral motion to avoid straight shots coming in, and that sets up the finish. Chito Vera has essentially croc-opped Dominick Cruz. The southpaw double attack, the open stance double attack, whatever you may call it, using the threat of the rear straight coming in to set up the head kick. And that's one of the more clever uses of that strategy, because with a lot of fighters who do the double attack stuff, they kind of they only do the double attack. And Chito Vera used the double attack as a tool to get the finish, instead of just, oh, this is my thing for this fight now, I'm gonna use the open stance double attack throughout the whole fight. And if it did that, I would argue that he would have lost the fight on the scorecards, simply because of all the sheer volume that Dominick Cruz threw, and because the double attack is quite easy to figure out if it's the only thing you do. But here, used appropriately, used in a specific situation for a specific opponent. Really great stuff, and really like gnarly finish. Like Cruz was completely out of it. If against Henry Cejudo you could dispute that Dominick Cruz is extremely tough and he could have gotten up and maybe continued the fight, I have no issue with that stoppage. I think that it's just that I think Cruz clearly got concussed in that fight. It's just that Cruz is still so tough that he immediately came to his senses, and he was fine afterwards. But the fight was stopped now, so he got. That's the reason why he got so angry. And here, just flatlined, falls over, face first. Just really, really nasty finish, and really cool too. Chito Vera completely smashed Dominick Cruz's nose to pieces with that head kick. Yeah, that's essentially the fight. There's lots of really neat stuff in there, lots of really like interesting exchanges, lots of interesting conceptual stuff to break down. But I think I've hit most of the points that I wanted to hit, the stuff that stood out to me watching that fight. I guess the one thing that bears mentioning is Dominick Cruz's utilization of takedowns, and how he historically used to utilize those takedowns is that he would, again, he'd use the hop step to launch himself into the staggered stance that favors getting in on the shot. And here it's kind of like the same thing. He draws Chito Vera into this trap that he set with the staggered stance. He would kind of use the staggered stance to draw Chito Vera into him, and then you launch himself into a leg attack. It's something you could. I'm not sure if you should emulate it in training. It's kind of fun to play around with, but you're better served with drawing committed strikes, normally utilizing normal fundamental boxing footwork, and then you could get to your knees, and then you could launch yourself into a takedown. And in MMA, wrestling from your knees is, it's not always like the best idea, because in actual wrestling, when you wrestle from a staggered stance, you wrestle from like hunched over. Well, not hunched over in the sense that your back is like round and you're like, it's more in the sense that you lower your level. And in MMA, lowering your level might take that extra bit of time that you can't afford. When you're wrestling in transition, it can be okay to just bend over at the waist and just ram your upper body into your opponent. It's fine, because they're also in a very tall stance for wrestling, and taking their legs out from underneath them is a much easier proposal than it is in actual wrestling. So things to watch out for this fight. Watch out for the way that Chito Vera switches his stances. And whenever he switches his stances, Chito Vera is one of those fighters where you actually have to ask yourself, what is Chito Vera trying to set up here? It's he's not switching stances mindlessly for no reason. What's next for Dominick Cruz? I don't know. Maybe... I don't know. I'd like him to retire, honestly. He's 37. He's he's been getting knocked out lately. I mean, he's... he could still beat someone like Pedro Munoz, and he did, in fact. But bantamweight, it's a very ruthless division. It's a very dangerous division. I don't know, maybe like Aldo versus Cruz. But then that's mostly me wanting Jose Aldo to get that last win before he retires as well. I don't know. As for Chito Vera, the winner of Jan O'Malley, I guess. And I don't think it would be a controversial thing to say that I expect the winner to be Petr Yan. And Petr Yan versus Chito Vera would fuck. It's like the thought of it makes me salivate. It's going to be a really, really awesome fight. I'm not sure if Sandhagen is booked. I haven't kept up with MMA all that well for reasons that I hope should be obvious. And the Sandy versus Chito fight it's going to be very interesting because I think Sandhagen might be a little bit too much for Chito Vera. Like his volume and his toughness is exactly the combination that may actually finally cause Chito Vera to lose on volume in his recent run. We'll see. So the rest of the card, the rest of the card that I actually watched, Nate Landwehr versus David Onama. What a silly fight! It was extremely ridiculous. I saw people say that this is I saw someone say that this is a Hall of Fame fight, and I mean, fucking, what are you smoking? I mean, I guess if there was a Hall of Fame for silly fights, then yeah, sure. But David Onama comes out like Styles on Landwehr, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce the name like in the German fashion because it's just easier for me. So David Onama styled on Nathaniel Landwehr and boxed him up, and then Landwehr comes out and starts like completely overwhelming Onama with volume and fucking him up on the ground. And so at a certain point, Nate Landwehr started thinking that he won the fight and that the fight was stopped. I don't know what happened there, but he just he let go of Onama, who was currently curled up on the ground getting beat up, and started circling the cage with his arms raised and celebrating. And I don't know, maybe he was like trying to showboat, like I got this in the bag so I can afford to do so, but what a bizarre decision. It's the type of brain thinking I can scarcely understand. I have a hard time understanding most showboating anyway, because I have this joyless post-Soviet brain, but at the same time, but this is, I think, even those guys who love showboating when fighters showboat would agree with me that this was extremely stupid. And Landwehr did it twice. And in doing so, he let David Onama get some of his bearings back. And even though Onama was completely knackered, he almost got it back. And I have nothing else to say other than, like, what the fuck are you doing, Nate Landwehr? Got the decision in the end, but... So anyway, and the last fight I watched on this card, like I woke up pretty late, and so I only caught the women's strawweight fight, which was actually pretty good. It was pretty decent, even though both girls had essentially no defense. But it lacked the usual WMMA staples of both girls standing like 5,000 feet away from each other and just pumping in the air, pumping their fists in the air. So I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly. So it was Yasmin Jauregui and Yasmin Lucindo. And both girls extremely young, only 20 years old, 20 and 23 years old. And you could clearly see it. They kind of like have this over-eagerness in them whenever you see young fighters fight. They kind of, the decision-making is sort of lacking, but they're very willing to exchange, and it made that's what made for a really fun fight. I would say Jauregui got the decision, and I'm still not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. If someone else knows the correct pronunciation, please correct me in the comments. So she got the decision, and I agree with that decision because her connections were much more crisp and clean. And she had an edge in hand speed, and I think the reason why she had an edge in hand speed is because she simply has cleaner technique. Lucindo, on the other hand, her punches clearly have more heft to them, but she also has the same problem like as Dominick Cruz does, or like, for example, Justin Iggy does whenever he throws his left hook, is that she would throw her punches really wide and really loopy, and it dissipates a lot of the energy. And a lot of those left hooks that she threw, and there were lots of really funny sequences where they would both throw the left hook at the same time and connect. They would both clang each other with the left hook, but Jauregui's left hook is much more crisp. It's cleaner, and it connects on the point of the chin, so it actually hurt Lucindo, even though it didn't like put her on Queer Street or anything. But it was a much cleaner, much more precise connection. And Lucindo's left hook came on this really wide arc, almost like outside of her own field of vision, and connected with the door knocking knuckles, which dissipates a lot of the energy. It's a big no-no in my book. But the shot was heavy enough that the other Yasmin kind of went, oh, fuck, I didn't like that. But they still went into it, and they both maintained their stance. They weren't formless or aimless in any way. They clearly paid attention to staying within their stance and maintaining that balance in order to throw lots of shots. And even though the entries were less than stellar, in the sense that they both sort of threw themselves at each other, I was still impressed with the pocket exchanges. It's something that happens very rarely, and it's also... I mean, yeah, this fight is basically like an example of why strawweight is the best women's division. And also, it makes a case for creating women's atomweight, and even going even lower. I mean, why does women's 145 even exist? I mean, come on, what are we doing? We could have had this every weekend, every time. Fucking UFC, man. But yeah, I think Jack Slack talked about how the reason why women have poor striking is because it's just the training situation. It's just that it's less than ideal. They frequently have to spar with men, and and I'm not trying to go into this ridiculous spiel about just man being stronger, but more suited for physical tasks, but. It's just a fact that a man will have more mass, and it's the upper body strength, and the connections will hurt more. And a lot of guys don't know how to spar with women, and it's a skill you need to learn as a guy. I think, as a common courtesy, if you have lots of girls on your team, just so they can actually develop proper boxing correctly and proper striking correctly. That's the solution, aside from just having more women come into the sport and create women's gyms. I don't know. I'm not sure as to the training situation of both Yasmins, but they clearly spar. They clearly spar a lot, and they clearly have the reactions of someone who spars a lot. They just don't have the defensive reactions yet. And something you can fix with lots of drills. Do partner drills. Start out slow. Like first you throw 1-2s, then you throw 1-2-3s, then you start adding uppercuts in, and then kicks. But you make you yourself have to defend the shots, and then you have to come back with a counter or something else. And that way, slowly over the course of your training, you start building, and you add stuff, and you develop the vision necessary to get that defense and get the defensive reactions in. Yeah, but I would very much enjoy seeing more of them. It was a cool fight, and it's a fight where saying that this was a decent fight would not be condescending or patronizing, which is something I hate whenever people talk about women's MMA. In that you could clearly see both girls like committing tons of technical. Like, in fights where you can clearly see both girls committing tons of technical and strategic and all sorts of other mistakes, and people would go, oh, these girls are so fucking tough, they're so good. They would beat up all the guys in the upper divisions and yada, 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 blah, 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 fucking blah. And that's just, I don't know, I'm not trying to speak on behalf of women, but to me personally, it comes across as patronizing and insulting. Like, if you want to grow, if you want women's MMA to grow, and if you want MMA in general to grow, be honest. These girls, they work their asses off. Same as anybody else training for MMA. So the one thing you can do is offer constructive criticism, so they can train and they can grow and they can address those criticisms. I mean, fucking Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena just happened the rematch happened last week, I think, not too long. No. Happened 2 weeks ago, and it was a completely ridiculous fight and just extremely primitive. It was basically like a 2008 adaptation on behalf, on part of Nunes. And saying that this is our women's MMA go-to, I think, is just kind of disingenuous. It doesn't sit well with me. We have room to grow. We have to have standards in order for the sport to grow. And you don't have to coddle these girls. They're fighters. They're professional fighters. Don't even think of them as girls, is my point. A fighter is a genderless entity meant to crave violence and cause violence and get the bell rung by other similar genderless entities. You know? So that's my approach. Okay, so that was the extent of the fights that I watched. People have been talking, saying that I should catch up on Bruno Silva versus Gerald Meerschaert because it was funny or impressive. I don't know. I like Meerschaert. I would just call him GM3. It's really hard for me to pronounce his name. I'm sorry, Gerald, but not a native speaker. The shot is a very he's kind of inspiring in a way. He's the slowest guy in all of MMA, and he still tries to be defensively responsible. He tries to do stuff properly and correctly, but it's kind of like the male version of he's the male version of Roxanne Modafferi. This may be substituted as an extreme insult, but I mean that makes sense, doesn't it? Anyway, I will try and watch that fight. And so me and Silas from the Forbidden Technique podcast have recorded a couple of pieces of alternate commentary in preparation for this fight night card. We watched a Chito Vera fight, the Chito versus Frankie Edgar fight, and Dominick Cruz versus Casey Kenny. Hence why I have lots of examples of Dominick Cruz performing stuff against Casey Kenny. And so, makes sense, right? So, check that commentary out on our Patreon. And I think I'm going to try and do some alternate commentary for some of those, or some of the fights that I've just talked about, because there was interesting stuff in there. I would like to actually revisit those fights and point out some other like little tiny technical details. Beyond that, I'm working on a bunch of articles, and I'm honestly not sure whether or not which one of those will be finished, if at all, but I'm working on those. I have lots of ideas. All this inactivity, even though I've... and I guess this is the jumping off point for what I'm going to say next. I've been basically like on the run for 5 months, and I couldn't produce, but I still had stuff floating around in my head, and I would like to act on it. Well, yeah, as I said, I've been on the run for 5 months, and I'm going to make an important announcement soon. There's going to be a release. We're going to release a post on the fight site, the actual site, where I detail all my experiences so far, and honestly, it's going to be a plea for help. And I think I'm going to record a companion piece, a podcast detailing all my misadventures over the course of the last almost half a year. But long story short, yeah, not doing too well, not doing too hot. My inactivity meant that we lost a lot of patrons on the fight site, and our income fell. And I've relied on that income to actually to survive, essentially, because so to just the general thing is that me and my wife have been country hopping all this time, and the patrons and the colleagues from the fight side have helped us out immensely. They're the reason why this is possible. But our fund that we collected together, sort of like silently, all hush-hush like, because we were concerned about safety, and we only did this within the circle of the fight side guys and our patrons. But that fund has now dried up. We'll still have a roof over our heads for the upcoming future, at least 3 months, but aside from the allowance, which is like $400 per month, there's no money coming in anymore. And unfortunately, me and my wife are forced to we'll be forced to do a fundraiser. And the details will be revealed in the upcoming posts that I mentioned, and in the companion piece. That's the companion piece, TENGRIDOME. It's going to be like TENGRIDOME special, or like TENGRIDOME announcements, or whatever. So yeah, we are forced to go outside this circle of TFS, the fight site adjacents, and just beg people for help. I don't feel too hot about the prospect of it, but it's just otherwise we'll be forced to return to Russia if we run out of money. And I think it should be understandable why I do not wish to do that, and why I do not wish to inflict that on my wife. And our families are both still stuck in Russia, and the goal here is to get through the tough times, immigrate somewhere, settle somewhere, find employment that will pay well, that will pay by first world country standards, and figure out a way to get our families out. And unfortunately, in order to accomplish that, we'll need to rely on fundraising. But yeah, anyway, the details will be released. So far, what you can do is subscribe to our Patreon to support all this, to support my further continued existence as a living, breathing human that can still release content. and yeah, there's now that I'm kind of back, I have my foot kind of like trying to eke my way back into my mojo. I'm gonna try and release more Patreon content, and the guys, Silas and the Forbidden Technique guys, are going to try and release more content, and I think Ed has found some time to actually like get back into his groove as well. So there's going to be content, and there are still lots of content beyond that. it's well worth your $3 per month. And I mean, it's fucking $3 per month. A lot of us are just doing this. A lot of the stuff are doing this for free, on sheer enthusiasm. And me, I just do this because I have no other source of income. And if I have, I cannot. And because I'm country hopping, I don't have work permits, and I can't find work other than in any way other than illegally. And I don't want to risk deportation, and I don't want to risk like finding a job where I'm going to be exploited or anything like that. So I need the Patreon, and we need the Patreon to continue to function. We're kind of Ed is working at a loss to keep the website up and keep all the subscription services up that we use to release content efficiently. And we could really use your help. And there's also the Discord server that I've been shilling for all this time. It's like we've built a really great community, and without them, none of this would have been possible. And even during my leave of absence, I've done my best to stay in that community and be active in it. I am constantly in the Discord, interacting with our community, offering analysis and advice and training advice, like stuff like training advice and advice on technique. And I have helped many Discord members with their training, and they can vouch for me. And it's a service I am always willing to offer. The community itself is really great, and I guarantee you'll get your money's worth. Like, long-lasting friendships have been made there, and more can be made besides. If you want to interact with like-minded fight fans that are intelligent, that care about the sport, and that also train and also would be really willing and eager to exchange training advice, this is the place for you. And we also host voice chat parties and fight watch parties. Just get in there. Get in touch with everyone. Make friends. So, on that note, watch out. Be on the lookout. Please be on the lookout for the official release where I explain my situation in detail. And it's going to have input from other staff members where they vouch for me and they confirm that this is all real. And I know it's going, like, I would be very happy to provide details and proof of my identity to really, like, make an ironclad case that I'm not, like, trying to dupe you into donating money for a cause that doesn't exist. But I can't do that. I would have to reveal personal details, and I don't want to put myself and my family and my wife in jeopardy. I'm sorry. So stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for further content releases, and subscribe to our Patreon, and check out the Fight Side Podcast Network. This is where most of our content currently hosted, and most Forbidden Technique episodes. It's a really great show. I really highly recommend it. So on that note, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I'm out. Cheers.